2023 NCAA March Madness Tournament. Number one, seed Alabama as we kick things off in the South here. I have Alabama. They are going to go ahead. They are going to defeat Texas A&M Corpus Christi. I am going to take Maryland here over West Virginia. Maryland is a very scrappy team, a little more scrappier than West Virginia. That sets up, you can see that matchup in the round of 32. Now, in this round of 32 matchup, I'm taking Charleston here over San Diego State, as well as I'll take Virginia against Furman. Listen, I love Charleston. They have one of the best resumes in the tournament. They are, again, hard gritty. They play defense. They're a very balanced team. I think Charleston has a chance to pull some upsets in this tournament, a tournament that, as we know, does not have a ton of stars. Now, Creighton has won one game in every tournament they've ever been in the NCAA tournament. That continues. Even though I don't love Baylor, they've had the number one, the number two. They slipped down at the end of the year in the Big 12 and ended up being a 3 seed. I do think they get by the round of 64. That sets up, obviously, as you can see, Creighton against Baylor. Now, Missouri against Utah State. I like Utah State. They have very balanced scoring. They have a guard combo that averages over 30 points a game. This team is big. They are lengthy. They are going to be able to make noise in this tournament. I think they knock off a good Missouri team, who, again, is good, but Utah State picks up the victory. Now, Arizona, again, I don't love and trust as much, but I do think they get one first-round matchup advantage here in Princeton. Moving on to the round of 32, as we are going to take this region by region. I have Alabama defeating Maryland. I think Alabama has the most talent in the country this year. And Charleston against Virginia. I mentioned how rough and tough Charleston is. I think a lot of these teams are balanced. Charleston is battle tested. Charleston is going to defeat Virginia. And Charleston, a Cinderella story, makes it to the Sweet 16. Creighton against Baylor. I already mentioned I don't trust Baylor. I think this Creighton team, who was in last year's tournament, got knocked off in the round of 32 by a very good team in North Carolina. This year, they bounced back. They end up defeating Baylor. And I already mentioned I don't trust Arizona State, and I love Utah State as a Cinderella story here again. I have Utah State moving on to the Sweet 16. And not only do I have that, I think their Cinderella story continues. They knock off Creighton, as well as Alabama defeats Charleston. And I have Alabama against Utah State in the Elite Eight on the South side. And I'm taking the number one seed, Alabama, who makes it through the South in the Final Four. But again, a lot of upsets on this side where you have, a 6 against a 3, a 10 against a 6, 1 against a 12, obviously 1 against a 10. Moving on to the East, I will take Purdue here in this first matchup against either Texas Southern or FDU, whoever wins that play-in tournament. I love Memphis. I won them last year. I think they go far again this year. I'm picking them here in a victory against FAU. Duke, obviously, new coach, no longer Coach K, but their current coach has a good relationship within the Duke program. Duke has a lot of talent, but this Oral Roberts team can defend. They're long and lengthy. There may not be a more Cinderella story in this year's tournament than Oral Roberts, who I think knocked off Duke, and they will end up playing Tennessee. Now, Kentucky, they're not as good as in years past, but they still have some good players, some players projected to go in the lottery of this year's NBA draft. I do think they knock off Providence and Kansas State. To me, they have gone for the gauntlet. They've defeated Texas, Baylor, Kansas. Every Big 12 team you can think of, they knocked off. They have a very impressive resume. I love Kansas State. Michigan State in the Big Ten got hot at the end of the year, and USC is a very small team. They're very guard heavy. They're a very streaky team. They did defeat UCLA earlier this year. This is one of the toughest matchups to predict in the whole tournament. I am taking USC, though, in an upset because, again, I do think there's going to be more upsets this year in the tournament due to the fact that most of the star players outside of Miller, obviously for Alabama, top 5, top 10 in the NBA draft, are not necessarily college talents. And Marquette, to me, is, again, a very balanced team. They got knocked off last year But they are a very good team that should have a chance this year to go further in the tournament. I do like Marquette to knock off USC. I do like Kansas State to knock off Kentucky. These are two of my favorites here in the East region. Kansas State and Marquette. I actually like them a lot. I like them more than Purdue. But I'm going to take Kansas State. Again, I think their resume just speaks for themselves. And I believe they will take on Oral Roberts. Or excuse me, they will not take on Oral Roberts. I messed that up on the bracket. They will take on the winner of Oral Roberts, and I believe Memphis, who knocks off Purdue, who has lost to the likes of Illinois, Maryland, Indiana. Purdue is not streaking, though they do have one of the tallest players in the nation at 7'4", going into this tournament. But I do believe Memphis, again, they are the same team basically as last year, just without Jalen Durham at center. I think that they are a very balanced team and they are going to provide real noise. And I do think that in the Sweet 16 here, it's going to be number 8 Memphis against number 12 Oral Roberts. I'm taking a big swing here in the eastern side of the bracket. I do think Memphis wins. I think their story ends in the Elite Eight when they get knocked off by Kansas State. And I am number 3, Kansas State, advancing on the east side of the Final Four. And they will take on Alabama. Moving to the Midwest side, Houston will defeat Northern Kentucky. Iowa and Auburn is a very close game. This is a swing game, in my opinion. Iowa and Auburn, they both have wins against, tough opponents, obviously. Iowa, Big Ten, Auburn, SEC. I'm going to go ahead and take the lower seed here. I'm going to go ahead and just take Auburn, but again, it's going to be a coin flip. I like Miami to defeat Drake, though I think Drake is a very good team. I think Miami is destined to at least win a game in this NCAA tournament, and I think they would have made it to the Sweet 16 if they didn't face a red-hot Kent State team. My Golden Flashes from the MAC Conference. Listen, Austin Arnold talked about it last week when we had him on. Kent State is undefeated at home this year. This is their best even years. Very balanced team. I love Kent State. I think they at least make it to the Sweet 16 where they will play Houston. And just a spoiler word here, I do have Houston knocking off Kent State and getting to the Elite Eight. Now, who they play is a big question mark. I don't love Iowa State. They do not have a lot of significant victories. And so one of my biggest upsets this year is I like Pittsburgh, who was red hot going into this tournament out of the ACC. They just won their playing game last night. I like Pittsburgh to knock off Iowa State. I do like them to play Xavier. I like Kennesaw State, but I think Xavier, who did not make it in last year's tournament, this year they're rebounding. They have a really solid team. I also think they knock off Pittsburgh, and they're on that side of the bracket. Texas A&M, Penn State. Again, Penn State was down in the Big Ten the whole regular season, had a great Big Ten conference tournament, made it to the finals against Purdue. I really like the way they're going, but this Texas A&M team plays small ball, but they're a very balanced team. I'll take Texas A&M with the victory, and I do think they take on Texas. Colgate is just kind of one of those teams that's always there in the tournament, but they really never do anything. Though Texas has lost a lot of big games, they're not as good as Kansas and some of those other teams, even Kansas State in the Big 12. I do like Texas A&M here out of the SEC to knock off Texas. And now this is a huge battle between Xavier and Texas A&M. The winner takes on Houston in the Elite Eight of the Midwest bracket. Very tough game here between a 3 and a 7 seed. But you know what? Again, Texas A&M, they get the right matchup. They will take on Houston, but they will not prevail. Houston, our second number 1 seed, makes it out of the Midwest. Now, we're going to the West. Kansas, last year's defending national champions, they knock off Howard. They will play Illinois, who again had a very good Big Ten tournament. I like St. Mary's a lot. They're one of the fixtures of the tournament. They're in there. I also love UConn to defeat Iowa. TCU against either Arizona State or Nevada. Very close. I think Arizona State and Nevada are very similar teams. I do not think either one of them, though, defeats TCU. I love Gonzaga, even though they're not as dominant as what they were 2 years ago. They are still one of the best basketball schools in the country. Give me Gonzaga here, and then also give me Northwestern over Boise State, and give me UCLA, who's been slipping a little bit, but I think they get back on track here against UNC Asheville. UCLA has a lot of talent. I think that they are destined to take on Gonzaga here, a 2-3. As you can see, there's a lot of good teams out there in the western side of the bracket. I think UConn is destined to take on Kansas in the Sweet 16, and this is a 1-4. 2-3 Sweet 16 in the West, but these are four of the best teams, in my opinion, in the entire tournament. And I think UConn knocks off Kansas, who struggled a little bit to end the regular season. They were projected by all accounts to be the overall #1 seed until the Big 12 tournament happened. I think they slip up in the Sweet 16. Their run ends, and it will be UConn against UCLA, who also slipped. It'll be UConn against Gonzaga, a 4-3 seed in the Elite Eight. If the 1 and 2 both go down, and I believe UConn represents, again, one of the most balanced teams in the country. UConn represents the West in the Final Four, and you have Houston versus UConn, 1 versus 4. Alabama against Kansas State, 1 versus 3 in the other Final Four matchup. But I do believe that both ones do prevail, and I think Alabama and Houston, who've been the two best teams all season long, compete in the national championship. So again, Alabama, Kansas State, Houston, UConn, I believe that they all represent in the Final Four, but I believe that Alabama will take on Houston in the national championship, with Alabama becoming your national champion with a final score of 65-63. And that is your NCAA tournament. I do have the University of Alabama has been the best school all season long, becoming your champion. But again, a lot of upsets along the way, even though the #1 seed usually eventually wins the NCAA tournament.